How many times has someone told you that I vote the way I vote because I'm a Christian? How many times have you said something like that? Now, if this is the way you think, I get it. It's the model that's been offered to us the most by the culture around us, and the church has adopted it pretty hard in the US, but it's kind of an awful, thoughtless, clumsy, simplistic way of navigating the massive responsibility of representative democracy. And saying things like this makes Christians look like easy, gullible marks. Today, we're going to look at just a few of the ways that Christians end up voting for different things, a few of the ways Christians end up disagreeing about politics and partisanship, but still actually remain coherently Christian. And then next week, we're going to look at why living with these kinds of disagreements is actually really important for us and for our churches. My name is Rick. I'm part of the Center for Christian Civics, which is a small nonprofit dedicated to helping Christians in the US think, speak, and act differently in a deeply divided public square. And this is the second in a series of videos that we're putting out on the what, the why, the how, and the how again about political diversity in the church. If that sounds good to you, if you want to see Christians develop a reputation for building bridges instead of burning them, then like this video and subscribe to our channel, because I don't want you to miss anything that we have coming up. Christians in the US like to think that our politics come straight from our biblical faith. But the truth is that there are a lot of mediating factors between our faith and our politics, and there's actually no way around that. Those mediating factors aren't standing in the way of some mythical, pure, platonic, unmediated version of Christian civic engagement. There's no way for us to relate to politics in the US without them. They're facts of life that we're going to have to always learn to live with, acknowledge, and make room for. Today, we'll list out just a few of them. This isn't a complete list. These are just a few of the legitimate factors that lead Christians of the same faith to different sides of various political divides. First, and we've covered this one in a video before, are you more sensitive to the doctrine of creation or the doctrine of the fall? A while back, we talked about the Christian story in 4 chapters: creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. Until we learn about Jesus' sacrificial redemption, we're all wandering around the world with our hearts and minds torn between creation and fall. Either we see that the heavens declare the glory of God, or we get that all of creation is waiting and groaning for something better. And whichever one we're quicker to recognize actually helps inform our partisan disposition. If you're more inclined to celebrate the glory of God's image as it's reflected in the world around you, you're probably more inclined to respond to the way progressives in the US craft policy and messaging. If you're more inclined to lament the brokenness of the world around you, you're probably more inclined to respond to the way conservatives craft policy and messaging. This doesn't determine your partisan leanings all on its own, but just like everything else we're talking about today, it's one of the factors that go into it. Next, Christians who disagree about politics might actually agree in principle, but disagree about strategy. Moral principles are distillations of biblical values. Political strategies are blunt, fallible efforts by fallible people to put those values into action. Abortion is a prime example here. Lots of Christians across the political spectrum agree that humans are made in God's image, and God's image is so precious that it should be protected whenever possible, even in the womb. Some Christians respond to that by pushing for blanket bans on abortion. Other Christians respond to that by working to address the problems that leave women feeling like abortion is often their best option. Things like paid family leave and universal prenatal and postnatal and pediatric care, and even housing policy are all pro-life issues for many Christians. They share the same principle of wanting to protect the image of God, but they have very different strategies about how to accomplish it. Can you think of another example where there are two positions that seem really different from one another, but they actually might have some kind of a shared principle at heart? If you can, let me know in the comments. Next, which Christian traditions have had the biggest influence on you? As we've talked about before, The biblical authors didn't have to wrestle with representative democracy, so Christians living in democracies have had to use our best wisdom to figure out what our relationship to representative government is supposed to look like. Different Christian traditions in the US have come up with different models for relating to government, and which traditions have had the most influence on you in your discipleship plays a big role in how you understand and view your own relationship to government. If you want to learn a little bit more about some of the major traditions of political theology in the US, we'll do some more videos on that later on, but in the meantime, you can pick up a book called 5 Views on the Church and Politics. It's part of Zondervan's Counterpoint series, and I'll have a link to it in the description and in the transcript on our website. Next, regional culture. Every region in the US has a slightly different set of expectations of government. These regional cultures are often something we end up carrying with us in our lives. We either unconsciously adopt them or we consciously rebel against them. A lot of people who grew up in the Northeast, for example, like if you grew up in New England or upstate New York, you probably look at government as kind of a publicly owned nonprofit, as kind of the tool we use to address problems that are too big for private entities to handle or that can't be fixed through market enterprises. People who grew up in the Deep South grew up in an environment where a lot of people think of government either as your security guard or your jail keeper. It's either the thing that exists to protect us against other people's worst impulses, or the thing that exists to keep some people trapped behind other people in our social order. Some regions of the country view government as the moderator of our cultural norms. Other regions view it more like the referee, keeping everybody playing fairly so that we can all be our most creative and productive selves. In his book American Nations, Colin Woodard proposed looking at North America as a collection of 11 distinct regional cultures. And that book is probably a good popular level place to start for anyone who wants to dig into this idea a little bit more. The next one we'll touch on, and we'll only touch on it briefly, is family culture. Your home environment growing up helps shape your vision of government. It helps shape your expectations of how a government should function, how other people should relate to authority. It helps shape your ideas about what kinds of legal or moral transgressions are the most serious. It helps shape your expectations of what a healthfully functioning community looks like. Next, people might have different passions from you, or if I can translate this one into some pretty common Christianese, some people just have a heart for issues that you don't have a heart for. When we see someone dedicate their time to volunteering at a women's shelter, we talk about how, oh, they really have a heart for people who are vulnerable or hurting. When we see someone dedicate their career to developing new medical treatments, we talk about how they have a heart for healing and public health. But somehow, when it comes to politics, when it comes to how people vote, we have a really hard time letting people have a heart for something different than we do. We start trying to get other people to conform themselves to our image, instead of remembering that the point of Christian relationships is for each of us to help one another conform more to God's image. And lastly, experiences. Two people can have a heart for the same issue, they can have a passion for the same issue, and they can start working on that issue from similar directions and still end up with really different takes about how that issue needs to be addressed. Let's use pediatric cancer as an example. Let's say two people both want to do something hands-on with their lives about pediatric cancer. And they go to medical school. They go to the same medical school. They get great grades. They get the same grades. They're tied for number 1 in their class. And when they graduate, the world is open to them when it comes to where they're going to work and what they're going to do. And one of them decides that they're going to go work at St. Jude in Memphis, one of the most prestigious, best funded, most ambitious pediatric cancer centers in the world. And that doctor ends up spending their career ushering children through some of the most cutting-edge experimental cancer treatments available. The other doctor looks at some maps and some statistics, and they find a small regional hospital somewhere in Ohio, in an area that has higher than average rates of pediatric cancer and a lower than average number of specialists. And they decide that that hospital is where they can make the biggest difference with their career. After a few years in the field, those two doctors are going to end up having really different takes about what we need to do about pediatric cancer. They're going to have very different ideas about where money needs to be directed, about what kinds of awareness campaigns need to happen, about what upstream preventative measures are the most urgent ones for the government to take. And that's actually okay. If we believe the Bible when it tells us that God orders our steps, then we believe that both of these doctors were supposed to have the exact experiences that led them to see different problems as most urgent when it comes to pediatric cancer. It would be wrong for their God-given experiences to not shape their perspectives on public health, even though they're both prioritizing public health equally. We like to think that there's a straight line, a one-to-one relationship between our faith and our political commitments, but the truth is, it's much more complicated than that. We just covered, 6 or 7 different factors that help shape our approach to politics? And here's the thing. Everyone who has the kinds of jobs I used to have, working on political campaigns to drum up support for candidates, knows that there are even more factors than that. Ignoring them and just going along with the kind of oversimplified, dumbed-down way of thinking about the relationship between faith and politics that we hear from people who are trying to get our votes or our money is only helpful to the people who want to find as many shortcuts as they can to get as many people to commit to voting for them as possible with as little work as necessary. And for people who follow the one who told us to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves, for people who are told that wisdom is more valuable than money and jewels, letting ourselves get manipulated like that is spiritual malpractice. Next week, we're going to talk about how these kinds of differences actually make it easier for each of us to grow in Christ, and how they make it a lot easier for our churches to witness coherently to our neighbors. But in the meantime, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. You can also find a transcript of every video we publish on our website, christiancivics.org, and while you're there, subscribe to our newsletter. If you do that, then after every video goes live, you'll get additional content related to each one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this small community helping the church think, speak, and act differently in the public square. And I'll see you next week.